All right, I'm going to be cleaning and rebuilding the carburetor on a 1998 Bayou 300. This is the 4x4 model. I have done several other videos on the 2x4 models, and after this video, I'm going to go through the differences between the two. There's some questions there. If they're different, they've got different part numbers, and just going to walk you through that video there. But I wanted to show you how to rebuild this carburetor from the top to the bottom. Obviously, I have it off the machine now. We've got our throttle cable that's going to run through here. It's going to attach into here. You give it throttle, push that thumb throttle. Your throttle is going to go up like this. At that same time, your butterfly's opening up just like that. You want to make sure that that sticks, make sure it snaps back freely, and make sure it doesn't get held up. Your idle, which is here underneath your carburetor, you have your idle adjust. Turn it clockwise, that's going to turn your idle up. Turn it counterclockwise to turn it down. Essentially what that's doing is opening up your butterfly a little bit more. When you go to adjust your idle, make sure your four-wheeler is completely warmed up and at running temperature, and then take and turn this up just very, very small increments at a time. All right, first thing I'm going to do is pull the bottom bowl off of this carburetor. What you can do while it's still on the four-wheeler, take a little Allen head wrench there and loosen that drain bolt there. Gas is going to dump out this bottom nipple here. You want to make sure that you've got a vent line on there or a fuel hose on there. Make sure that that fuel is draining beneath your motor instead of on top of your motor. It's going to discolor your motor, going to create some problems. So you just want to always make sure that you've got a fuel line attached to it. You've got 4 Phillips screws on the bottom here. Keep in mind where that idle adjuster mount goes. It's going to be these here. It's going to be a little bit longer screws. You can actually use any of them, but they do come with screws that have washers on them, and then they are a little bit longer. So go ahead and pull these 4 screws off here. All right, go ahead and remove these screws, and you can just kind of let your mount go. Pull your bottom bowl up here, and there is your bottom bowl here. Here's an O-ring. O-ring, you want to make sure that you inspect that, make sure it's in good condition. You want to make sure that your overflow tube here is in good condition. You can take compressed air or carbon choke cleaner, blow through here, and it will come out this bottom nipple here. If it doesn't, you want to make sure and clean that really well. This is if your four-wheeler's bouncing around, sitting in your shop, and maybe your needle's leaking there, you will have fuel coming up here. It's going to dump into your overflow. If it does not go out your overflow there, it's going to drain into your cylinder. So you want to make sure you've got that working properly. Also, you want to make sure you've got a good needle valve here so that you don't have that problem. You want to make sure when you go and clean your carburetor that underneath of this plate here, you clean really well. A lot of times dirt and debris will sit down in there. They do that so dirt and debris does sit in there as opposed to in here sloshing around. But it could still get sucked up through there when you're running your four-wheeler. Set that aside here. We've got your main jet here, secondary main here, and down inside this port here, you've got your pilot jet. Your pilot jet, if your four-wheeler's having a hard time starting, it's not running properly, first thing I would check is your pilot jet. It's a very common problem because it's such a small orifice. Your main jet that's here, you can take an 8mm wrench and loosen it up, take it off like that, or you can take a flat screwdriver and take that small jet out of the top there. I'm going to do both for you. So I'm going to take this main jet here, loosen it up, and that's your main jet. This is going to be your biggest orifice jet on this carburetor here. Set that aside. That's a 140. Then your secondary main, which is here. Loosen that up. And your secondary main, it looks similar to your main jet there, but it's a little bit longer, if you can tell that. There's a little bit of a difference there. This is going to be, like I said, much smaller. This is a 58 jet there. And then your pilot jet that sits way down in here. You want to make sure you've got a good hold on there before you start turning so you don't round that off. Once you round it off, it's extremely difficult to pull these out. That pilot jet there, a lot of times you got to flip that carburetor over and dump it out. This is a 38 pilot jet there. So obviously your smallest orifice jet there. You want to make sure though that when you're holding this up to light, you can see through it, blow through it with carbon choke cleaner and compressed air. Now your main jet holder here, you can pull off and clean that. If you're running this through a cleaner, an ultrasonic cleaner, or with carb cleaner, you want to make sure that all these ports are cleaned out. Even these small holes here on the side need to be cleaned out. This need to be able to see through, blow through, and shoot carb and choke cleaner through it. And then there's your needle. Your needle that comes from your top here, when you hit your throttle, it's going to open this slide up here. It's going to pull that needle up. So you want to make sure that your needle's working properly. You should be able to see it down in there. I'm going to give you a little demonstration here. When you've got your carburetor functioning properly, if you've got your main jet sitting here, if you've got your main jet in here, and you go to give your four-wheeler throttle, it's going to open up the butterfly on the other side. It's going to allow more air to flow through there, opening up this slide in this needle. It's going to take fuel that's in your bottom bowl area here and suck it up through your main jet and your secondary main, and then go down into your motor. If you have too small of a main jet or too small of a secondary main jet, you're not going to have enough fuel flowing up through that carburetor to go into your motor, and you're going to be running a lean mixture there. If you've got too big of a jet, you're going to have the opposite. You're going to be running too rich. That's why it's important, if you add any aftermarket parts on your four-wheeler, or you're riding in different altitude, you want to make sure you have the right size jets in there. You're going to have too much fuel, not enough fuel. Either way is going to cause some damage to your four-wheeler. So make sure you've got the right ones in there. Next, we're going to pull our float off here. Underneath there is your needle valve. And you can take, a lot of times, a small screwdriver, possibly a pick, and push that pin out. It should just slide out fairly easily. You don't want to take a pick and use a hammer and tap on the carburetor, because you're going to break these posts off here. These are aluminum posts. They break very, very easily. Once they're broken, there's nothing you can do. Pull that pin out there, lift your float off. Now you've got your needle underneath of there. This is called the needle valve here. And you've got your seat area here. You want to make sure you inspect this needle valve. Make sure it's not grooved. Make sure your seat here is not squared off. Sometimes that will happen after time. You can adjust this needle here, and that's by this small aluminum tab here. You can go up or down slightly. There is specifications in your manual. I can get those if you need, but you want to make sure that that's working properly. That should, when your float goes up, it should shut your fuel off. So this way, if it goes up this way, it should shut your fuel off. If your fuel is getting low, if your carburetor is getting low on fuel, it'll drop down, allowing fuel to flow into your carburetor. And then as soon as it gets full again, it'll shut that fuel off. If it's not shutting that fuel off, it's going to drain through your overflow or drain directly into your motor. While we're here, we're going to talk about our air fuel screw. What you want to do before you go and remove this screw here is count how many turns in it is. So we're going to count here, half turn, 1.5, 2 turns. 2 turns out is pretty standard. Anywhere from 1.5 to 2.5 turns is about standard. Now we can take and remove this. Be careful when you remove this. You've got a spring in there, and you've got a very, very small washer, and you've got an O-ring. Sometimes if that O-ring is bad, it will, if you tip that carburetor up like this, sometimes that O-ring and that seal will come out with it. You want to make sure that you don't lose those parts. They're extremely small. We can get our washer out here. Most of the time, that rubber seal is going to stay down in there. And if we're not replacing it, which we've already rebuilt this carburetor, I just want to be able to do a video for you. We've pulled that O-ring out already and put a new one in there. And I'm not going to pull it out again because it takes, you've got to, a lot of times, take a screwdriver or a pick to get it pulled out of there. And I don't want to worry about damaging that. So what I do then is drop that washer down there, make sure it seats properly. You can either take your spring at this point, or you can slide your spring on your air fuel screw and just slide it in there very slowly like that. Now, set in your air fuel mixture here, screw this all the way in until it's completely seated, and then back it out the correct number of turns, which on this one was 2 turns. So completely seated position there, and go out half, 1.5, 2 turns. Now we're going to get to the top of your carburetor here. This is where the diaphragm is housed, along with your needle, your slide, and there's a spring in there. So take these 4 screws out there, hold this black cap on. I do take my finger, put it over top of this cap. There's a spring underneath here, and parts aren't going to go flying everywhere, but I like to make sure that I'm being careful with the diaphragm that's underneath of there. If you let this spring up too fast, or parts do kind of jump out of there with that spring, you could potentially damage that diaphragm. Those diaphragms aren't cheap, and as long as they're not ripped or torn or dried out or destroyed, you can reuse those. It's not something that typically comes with a jet kit, and they are, I believe, anywhere from $70 to $150 from the factory there. If you've got questions on running an aftermarket carburetor or a unbranded knockoff carburetor, check out my video. I walk through that process, and I can do a comparison with this carburetor as well. I just showed you a couple of the differences between the carburetors there. Okay, we've got our black cap here, we've got our spring, we've got our diaphragm. The best way to get this diaphragm out of there is watch it from up top here, but take your finger and just push it up just like that. If the carburetor hasn't been apart for a really long time, or maybe never has, a lot of times that diaphragm will stick right in this groove here, and you go to push it out, you might damage it. So just be really careful of that. Then we've got your needle underneath here. You can just take and push that up very carefully. We've got your plastic keeper here. We'll set that aside. Your needle does have some numbers on it to tell you what size it is. You can get longer ones, shorter ones, wider ones, fatter ones. But a lot of times you can do all the adjusting you need to do with your air fuel screw and your jets. Most of the time you don't have to replace this needle. I guess if you go and put a whole bunch of performance stuff on your four-wheeler, maybe a needle is needed. So now going back together, I like to take that needle, make sure it goes down in the proper hole there. There is one farther down. You can see it there. It's on the side there. You want the middle one there. So very carefully put that in there. Take our keeper, slide it into place. Make sure it falls down where it needs to go. There's kind of a groove on top of that area there that can cause this keeper not to fall into the correct position there. And it should go all the way down and rest on that needle. Now I like to take and fold that diaphragm over there very carefully again. If you do get gas or fuel, if you get gas or carb clean on this diaphragm, you want to make sure you put it in a windowsill, let the sun dry that out. Obviously don't put it in front of a heater or in front of a fire. You'll melt it and damage it. But you do want the sun to dry all that carbon choke cleaner and that fuel out of there. What that does is it either shrinks it or expands it. It makes it really hard to get back into this groove here. And without it being in this groove, your four-wheeler will not run right. So you also want to inspect it for any leaks or any rips or tears. This slide will only go on one direction, so be careful you put it in the right way. It won't actually let you go down the other way, but you just don't want to force it too much. The other thing you want to check, make sure your needle's going down into your that port there. And a lot of times if you're laying it on its side like this, you're going to have to take your fingers in there and put it in the correct spot there. Take and slide that down. Now what I do is take my finger, put it underneath of there, and get that diaphragm put in the correct position. Slide my spring on there, grab my cap, doesn't matter which direction that goes. Make sure you got that spring on that tab there, set it in there, and then still with my finger underneath that slide there, I take and hold that cap on. Now I take my screws here. It's going to be the 4 black screws. Slide those in position. Okay, once we get those snugged up, you can let go of the slide underneath there. You want to make sure that that slides up and down properly. Another test you can do is take compressed air, blow it in this orifice here. That'll actually trick your diaphragm into thinking that air is flowing through there. It'll pull your slide and your needle up. That's just a quick test to see if your slide is working properly. Now we're going to take our float here. We're going to take our pin that runs through there, and we're going to take our needle here. It doesn't matter which direction that goes on there. Slide it into place. Again, make sure that that seat area is cleaned out completely. You can take the fuel coming from your fuel tank, comes in this port here, runs down this line here, and comes out of this valve here. So you want to make sure that you take compressed air, blow through there really good. Okay, now you can take your needle there, set it down into place. Very carefully again, because again, that's a rubber tip on there. You can take your pin, slide it in there, slide it all the way through. Make sure that that's functioning properly. Main jet there, drop it into place. Secondary main, again, it's a little bit bigger, a little bit longer here than your main jet. Also smaller orifice, so make sure you grab the right one there. Snug those up. These are brass jets, so if you over tighten them, you will damage the carburetors or the jet. So make sure you don't damage them. And then when you're turning them, make sure you've got a good screwdriver and a good hold on it so you don't round those tops off. Especially on this pilot jet here, as there is no backing out after you screw that one up. All right, take your bottom bowl here, inspect this O-ring, make sure it's in good condition. You can set it on there. You want to make sure that if you do set it on there the way that we did there, that your O-ring stays in place. You also want to make sure that you drop those down into the correct position. Sometimes those tabs there will hold you up. Set those down, make sure it slides into place. Take your idle holder mount there, put it into place there. Again, the longer screws go there. Typically, they have small washers on them. Put those in place and snug these up. Those are all snugged up. We've got this carburetor completely cleaned and ready to go back on the four-wheeler. This is a key-end carburetor. It's got a CVK up top there, and then you've got a model number right behind your idle screw here. It's a genuine carburetor for the Kawasaki Bayou 300. Again, check out my video on the unbranded knockoff carburetors. I just went through a lot of the differences there. You want to make sure you know what you're buying there with that carburetor. If you've got any questions on this, make sure you leave those in the comments below. If this video has been helpful, make sure you like and subscribe. I appreciate you watching.